The restaurant buzzed with the electric hum of evening service knives tapping plates, laughter bubbling like wine, and shoes skimming polished tile. In the middle of it all stood Brandon Wells, not so much working as he was performing. His vest was pressed, his smile rehearsed. He wasn't there to serve meals, he was there to be seen. To Brandon, the dining room was a stage, and tonight he was the star. He had long believed he was destined for more. Bussing tables, wiping down glassware, those were tasks for people like Ethan Moore, the quiet one. The one who did the work, didn't talk back, and didn't expect recognition. Brandon, on the other hand, expected nothing less than elevation, and this evening the universe seemed ready to deliver. Because Laura Simmons, the current manager, had just dropped 2 bombs. First, the restaurant would be moving to a new tipping system. No more pooled tips. Everyone would keep what they earned. Second, she was being transferred to a different branch, leaving the manager position at this location wide open. And the best part? The new owner would be visiting tonight, observing staff quietly before choosing the new manager. The news lit a spark in Brandon, a fire of ego and anticipation. He didn't just straighten his collar, he straightened his entire posture. From that moment on, he began acting not as a waiter, but as a manager in waiting. He balked suggestions at staff, adjusted Ethan's placement of glassware with a sneer, and spoke to customers like he was on a political campaign. Ethan, meanwhile, continued his duties without fuss, clearing dishes, smiling softly, offering service without spectacle. He wasn't playing a role, he was just doing the job. And then the pivotal moment arrived. A high-profile table of executives dressed sharp, wearing watches that sparkled like the chandeliers above them, entered and were seated right in Brandon's section. It was, in Brandon's eyes, fate. He rushed to greet them like royalty, offering wine on the house before they had even glanced at the menu. He pitched the most expensive steaks, seafood platters, imported wines. Every gesture was calculated. Every smile was currency. He wasn't just chasing a tip, he was buying the future. But across the restaurant, another guest entered unnoticed. Mr. Cole Bennett, dressed simply in a coat that had long lost its shape, took a seat quietly at a corner table. No entourage. No reservation. Just quiet dignity and tired shoes. Brandon saw him, dismissed him instantly. He nudged a host and waved it off. "Let Ethan take it," he muttered, without even turning his head. But Ethan was already occupied. Brandon didn't care. He'd made up his mind. The man didn't look like money. To Brandon, that meant he wasn't worth the effort. After all, why waste energy on someone who would likely order water and bread when a table full of executives was promising a 4-digit tip? That was the moment it began the judgment, the division, the quiet dismissal that would come to define everything. What Brandon didn't realize, what no one could, was that Mr. Bennett wasn't here to eat. He was here to watch. And soon, Brandon would learn that the man he treated like nobody was the one with the power to rewrite his entire future. While Brandon floated through the restaurant like a man already promoted, the evening unfolded beneath him, quiet, steady, indifferent to his self-importance. His voice echoed a bit too loudly, his laughter just a little too forced. But to the untrained eye, he looked like a model employee, polished, engaged, charming, exactly the kind of man who wanted to be seen and, more importantly, believed. He hovered at the table of executives, Mr. and Mrs. Renault, among others, doting on them like a concierge at a 5-star hotel. He dropped wine names, narrated the origin of the Wagyu like a historian, and gestured with flair every time a new dish was placed. Every recommendation was the most expensive, every comment wrapped in flattery. This wasn't about food anymore. It was about performance, and Brandon was giving his best show. In the background, Ethan Moore moved with quieter rhythm. No grandeur, no showmanship. Just work steady, thoughtful, and real. And it was Ethan who, noticing the unattended guest in the corner, stepped in without being asked. He brought water, a basket of bread, a menu, no fuss, no questions, just respect. That guest, Mr. Cole Bennett, hadn't asked for much. And perhaps that was the test. His coat was faded, his hands calloused, his demeanor unbothered. There was no hunger for attention, no need to prove himself. He simply waited, quietly, like someone who had spent his whole life watching others speak first. Brandon, of course, had noticed. Not the man himself, but Ethan's attention toward him. And that annoyed him. To Brandon, time spent on someone who clearly wasn't going to spend money was time wasted. He even called it out behind the bar with a mocking grin, referring to Mr. Bennett as the bread and water guy. He laughed at the idea that Ethan was wasting prime service time on a table that would yield nothing in return. He boasted, not so quietly, that he'd already served more in 1 hour than Ethan would all night. It wasn't just arrogance, it was certainty. Brandon had drawn his conclusion the moment Mr. Bennett sat down. Faded clothes, no reservation, simple manners. And for Brandon, that meant no tip, no value. What he didn't realize, and what made the irony so brutal, was that this moment of judgment, this instant dismissal, was the moment his own fate began to unravel. Ethan didn't defend himself. He didn't need to. He brought another basket of bread when asked, refilled water without comment, kept his pace, no rush, no resentment. And if he sensed that something about Mr. Bennett was different, he didn't show it. Ethan didn't need answers to show respect. But Brandon couldn't let it go. He leaned in again, smirking, and said with full confidence that Mr. Bennett would probably just get up soon, apologize, and leave without ordering anything. "Oldest trick in the book," he whispered. "Free bread, free water, free ride." There it was, the full measure of his view of people. That generosity was a scam. That humility was weakness. That kindness, if not profitable, was useless. And all the while, he remained blind to what truly mattered. Because as he served steaks and seafood to the table he worshipped, he didn't notice the glances. Sharon Blake, the quiet woman who had walked in moments earlier and taken a seat beside Mr. Bennett, had yet to introduce herself, and yet she was already watching. She saw it all. Every table has a story, and the story Brandon was writing was about to write him back. As Brandon polished his performance with each refill and recommendation, he barely noticed that the room had shifted. His eyes were locked on the Renaults, watching them enjoy every lavish plate like they were royalty. Like they were the gatekeepers to his dream title. He imagined their tip before they'd even glanced at the check. In his mind, the numbers danced like dollar signs in a jackpot machine. But in the far corner of the restaurant, where no spotlight shone and no waiter lingered for praise, something quieter and far more profound was unfolding. Ethan Moore returned to Mr. Cole Bennett's table with a second basket of bread. No instructions had been given, no demands made. Just a simple, unspoken agreement. The guest would be treated with the same respect as any other. And so, Ethan did what Brandon never could. He served without needing to be seen. To outsiders, the moment was small, insignificant even. But that's the thing about respect. It's clearest when no one's watching. And in that moment, Ethan wasn't just bringing bread. He was extending dignity. Brandon, of course, scoffed at it. Another basket of bread? Another glass of water? It was pathetic in his eyes, a waste of labor on someone who hadn't even ordered a single entree. He mocked it behind closed doors, referring to Ethan's table as the Goodwill Project. And when he laughed, others sometimes joined in, nervously. Not because they agreed, but because Brandon's confidence was hard to challenge. Meanwhile, Brandon's table was an opera of opulence, appetizers, imported wine, stories about business deals. He nodded along, played host, offered compliments like they were hors d'oeuvre. And in his mind, he was already manager, already promoted, already done with nights like this, once and for all. But there's a danger in assuming a crown that hasn't been offered, especially when you've built your throne on ego and assumption. Because while Brandon hovered at the edge of the Renault's table, faking interest in their stories, Sharon Blake sat quietly beside Mr. Bennet, still watching, still listening. Brandon hadn't noticed her yet. She hadn't spoken, hadn't interrupted his show. That, of course, made her invisible to him. Ethan, on the other hand, treated her like any other guest. A glass of water, a subtle nod, a check-in that didn't linger too long. He didn't know who she was. He didn't need to. Kindness to him didn't require credentials. Mr. Bennet, still composed, said very little. He never mentioned his name, never hinted at status. He didn't need to. His patience spoke volumes the way he waited without complaint, the way he thanked Ethan with a look, not words. He was the kind of person who didn't need to prove anything because he already knew who he was. And still, Brandon remained convinced that he had chosen wisely, that Ethan had wasted an hour of his shift on nothing while he had entertained a gold mine. But what Brandon didn't see, couldn't see, was that the most expensive thing in the room wasn't on the menu. It was the lesson slowly making its way toward him. The illusion began to crack not with shouting, but with silence. When Brandon Wells returned to the Renault's table with the check, his confidence bordered on theatrical. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind for hours. The gracious nods, the handwritten thank you on the receipt, the generous tip folded neatly between the lines. He didn't just expect it, he deserved it. But when he glanced at the slip, zero. No tip, no note, just a total and a signature, clean and final like a door being closed. Brandon blinked, laughed even. It had to be a mistake, a joke. Maybe they were tipping in cash, maybe it was European custom, or perhaps, surely, there was a misunderstanding. So he circled back, performing concern like an actor mid-scene, asking gently, was something forgotten? They smiled, politely, too politely, and informed him, without hesitation, that no, they don't tip. Cultural thing. Oh, and the company celebration, it was more of a survival party. They hadn't gotten rich. They'd just avoided bankruptcy. And then, as if to scrape salt into the wound, they requested more bread. Brandon stood frozen, the receipt trembling slightly in his fingers. All the charm, all the effort, all the bending over backward for status and illusion reduced to crumbs, literally. And across the room, the worthless table he had written off was still there, still waiting, still watching. Ethan Moore observed from the side, not with satisfaction, but with quiet recognition. He had warned Brandon, not with words but with actions, that humility is not weakness and that dignity doesn't demand attention. It simply exists, whether it's seen or not. But Brandon didn't have time to process the lesson, because that was when Sharon Blake rose from her seat. He saw her clearly now, the woman who had been sitting beside Mr. Bennet. The one he hadn't bothered to acknowledge, the one Ethan had treated no differently than anyone else. She walked toward the center of the room, calm and composed, her presence somehow louder than the chatter and clatter of the dining hall. And then, Without raising her voice, she addressed Brandon directly. Not with fury, not with insult, but with clarity. She introduced herself as the new owner of the restaurant. And with that, the bottom fell out. Brandon's forced smile twitched. He tried to recover, tried to stand straighter, maybe even tried to explain, but she didn't need explanations. She had seen enough. She had watched the way he treated Mr. Bennet, her guest. She had listened to his condescending tone, his disregard for Ethan, his obsession with money and status. She had observed everything quietly, intentionally. Then she turned to Ethan and offered him the position Brandon had been chasing all night. There was no ceremony, no applause, just a simple gesture that held more weight than 1,000 promotions. Ethan accepted with humility, nodding once. No gloating, no words wasted. He didn't need to win, he had simply been right all along. Brandon? He stood silent, stripped of performance, exposed. Not because he'd failed, but because who he was had finally been seen. And just when he thought it couldn't get worse, another figure stepped through the entrance. A man in a sharp suit, clipboard in hand, badge on the belt, IRS. Investigating undeclared income tips not reported. The kind Brandon had been pocketing off the books for months, the kind he had thought no one noticed. Suddenly, the free wine, the off-the-record charm, the whispered jokes about cash is king, all came rushing back like ghosts. What had begun as Brandon's big break had turned into the kind of fall that doesn't leave bruises, just silence. And silence, in this case, was deafening. The restaurant didn't pause for his downfall. Orders still came in, silverware still clinked, and guests continued to smile unaware. But, for Brandon Wells, time had stopped. He stood near the register, eyes unfocused, face pale not from embarrassment alone, but from realization. Everything he had built, the performance, the ambition, the illusion of control, had collapsed under the weight of who he truly was. There was no applause, no shouting, just quiet rejection delivered by the very people he had tried so hard to impress. Ethan Moore, now named the new manager, didn't gloat. He simply returned to his routine. He helped a staff member stack dishes. He picked up a receipt someone had dropped. He filled out inventory. Authority hadn't changed his posture, it had simply confirmed his integrity. The staff took notice, not just of the promotion, but of the energy shift. Respect moved toward Ethan effortlessly, not out of fear or hierarchy, but because he had already been leading in the background, with no need for credit. Sharon Blake didn't say another word to Brandon. She didn't have to. Her silence said everything. We saw who you are, and that's all we needed to know. Even Mr. Cole Bennet, the man Brandon had brushed aside as irrelevant, didn't look back in judgment. He simply finished his meal quietly, left a generous tip, and departed without fanfare. There was no, "I told you so," no reveal, just a quiet grace that needed no explanation. And Brandon? He lingered no longer the star of the show, but a ghost on the edge of the stage. He tried to laugh in the break room, but no one joined him. Tried to reclaim casual authority, but no one responded. Even the room had stopped listening. Later, someone found a folded IRS letter left on his locker door confirming a formal audit. The consequences were no longer abstract. They were paperwork, deadlines, fines, and reputation. What he had tried to hide had finally come to collect. He left early that night. No one stopped him. No applause, no farewell. Just absence. And that, in truth, was the most painful part. Not the public fall, but the quiet, fading into irrelevance. Because when a man builds his worth only on being seen, to be ignored is the deepest cut of all. Meanwhile, Ethan stayed behind to close up. He double-checked the reservations for tomorrow, reorganized the service station, and before turning out the lights, he paused not to smile, not to pose, but to make sure everything was in order. Because for him, leadership wasn't about being above anyone. It was about being responsible for everyone. Some downfalls are loud, but others are quiet enough to echo forever. This wasn't a story about tips or uniforms or who sat where. It was about respect, the kind that isn't written into a job title. The kind you either give freely or lose without knowing. Don't chase titles, don't serve for approval. Serve with character even when no one's watching. Thanks for watching video.